Welcome to Precision Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 52 of ASP.NET GridView tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss about implementing custom paging in a GridView control that uses object data source control. With object data source control, it's possible to implement both default paging and custom paging. In part 51 of this video series, we discussed about implementing default paging. So what's the difference between default paging and custom paging? This is a very common ASP.NET interview question as well. With default paging, all the rows are retrieved from the database every time we navigate to a different page within the grid view control. For example, let's say there are 10,000 rows in the database table, and then let's say, for example, on the grid view control we have set the page size to 3. When the grid view control loads, it's going to load all the 10,000 records from the database table, and then the grid view control will display the correct set of those 3 records. So if I navigate to a different page number, then again when the web form posts back, it's still going to load all the 10,000 records, from which the grid view control will display the correct set of 3 records for that page. So just imagine the amount of network traffic that goes on between the database server and the web server with default paging. But whereas with custom paging, we don't have this problem. With custom paging, we only retrieve the subset of rows that will be displayed in the grid view control. So for example, when we set the page size to 3 with custom paging, we only load the correct set of those 3 records, even if the underlying database table has got 100,000 records. So obviously, with custom paging, we get much better performance over default paging. However, when compared with default paging, custom paging is relatively complex to implement. In this video, we'll discuss about implementing custom paging. So obviously, to implement custom paging, the first thing to basically do is to write a stored procedure which is going to return us the correct set of records. So for example, if we have a grid view control whose page size is set to 3, and if I am on the first page of the grid view control, then we need a stored procedure which is going to return the records from 1 to 3. And when we navigate to the second page, it should return records from 4 to 6. So basically, if we have to design a stored procedure which can do that, what are the two things that we need to provide to the stored procedure? Obviously, the starting row index and then the maximum number of rows that we need. So if we set the page size to 3, then and we are on the first page, the start row index will be 1 and maximum rows is 3, so we get 3 rows. When I'm on the second page, the start row index will be 4 and the page size is again 3, so I get 4, 5 and 6. So first let's see how to design the stored procedure. So for this demo, we'll be using this table TBL employee. Within this table, I have got these 8 rows. I have the stored procedure already implemented. And if you look at the stored procedure, it has got 2 input parameters, the start index and the maximum number of rows. So obviously, if I am on the first page, the start index is going to be 1, the start row index, and I need 3 rows. So if I pass in 1, 3, so start index is 1, maximum rows is 3, I execute this, look at that, I get the first set of 3 records. Now when I am on the second page, the start row index will be 4, and obviously the maximum rows will again be 3 because the page size is always going to be 3 within the grid view control. Okay, so when I set this to 4, look at that, I get the correct set of 3 records, 4, 5, 6. And when I navigate to the third page, the start index is going to be 7 and the page size will still remain 3. But then remember, this table has got only 8 records, so the last page will only get 2 records, 7 and 8. Okay, so let's now inspect the stored procedure. How did we implement this? So if you look at this is very straightforward. All we are doing here is we are using row number function to achieve this. Okay, if you are new to row number function, we discussed about this in SQL Server video tutorial, so please watch that video. So select row number over, we are ordering it by employee ID, and then for the row number we are giving an alias as row number, and then employee ID, name, gender and city are the columns from TBL employee table. So if you look at this inner query, it's very straightforward. I execute this, I get all the rows, employee ID, name, gender and city. I also have a row number. So this inner query results, we give it a name. This is the derived table, employees. So if you look at this employees, we'll have this row number and then the rest of the TBL employee table columns. And look at the outer query. We are saying select employee ID, name, gender, and city. We are only selecting 1, 2, and 3, employee ID, name, gender, and city, because these are the columns that belong to TBL employee table and which we want to show to the end user. We don't want to be showing row number. That's why I am only selecting the required columns from this derived table employees, which will also contain row number. Okay, and then look at what I'm doing. I am filtering based on that row number, where row number is greater than or equal to start index. So if we pass start row index as 1, so row number greater than or equal to 1, and then row number is less than start index plus maximum rows. So what is the sum of start index plus maximum rows? 1 plus 3 is 4, and row number should be less than 4, meaning I get records from 1 to 3. And similarly, if we pass start row index as 4 and the page size as 3, that's the maximum rows, so obviously row number is greater than or equal to 4, so it's going to start at 4, and then row number is less than start index plus maximum rows, which is going to be 4 plus 3, so less than 7. So I get 4, 5, 6, the correct set of records for the second page. Okay, so pretty simple and straightforward. Now you may be wondering, why are we computing row number? Why can't I use employee ID to do this check? Okay, just imagine if an employee resigns, or for some reason we have deleted an employee record from this table, we will not have employee IDs in sequence. So that's the reason why we can't use employee ID for this where clause. That's the reason why we are computing this row number and using it. Alright, so obviously we are done with designing the stored procedure. Now let's flip to Visual Studio. Since we want to use object data source control, obviously we need to build our employee data access layer. So let me add a class file to this project. Add class, and let's call this employee data access layer.cs. And then to encapsulate employee information, we obviously need to design an employee class. I have this already implemented, and if you look at this class, it's a straightforward class with 4 auto-implemented properties: employee ID, name, gender, and city. And then within employee data access layer class, we need to write a method which is going to retrieve the, basically execute that stored procedure and retrieve the correct set of records that we need. So obviously we need to write some ADO.NET code. So first let's go ahead and import the required ADO.NET namespaces. And then let's write a method which is going to invoke the stored procedure spgetEmployees. And again, just to speed things up, I have this method already implemented. So let me copy and paste this method within our employee data access layer. So if you look at this method, it's very straightforward. The name of the method getEmployees, and notice the signature of the method. It has got 2 input parameters: start row index and maximum rows. These 2 input parameters of this method will be passed as values for these stored procedure parameters. So let's inspect this method. So what are we doing? This method is actually returning a list of employees, and then it has got 2 input parameters: start row index and maximum rows. And the first thing we are doing, we are creating a variable of type listEmployee. Using the configuration manager class, we are reading the connection string. Using that connection string, we are preparing the SQL connection object. And then we are preparing the SQL command here. Notice the command, it's spgetEmployees. It's nothing but the name of the stored procedure that we have just implemented. And since that is a stored procedure, we are setting the command type to stored procedure. And since this stored procedure has 2 input parameters, we are specifying those 2 parameters here. So we are creating a parameter object, and then we are specifying the parameter name as @startIndex. That's what is the name of the parameter. And then we are specifying the parameter value. So what is that parameter value? Start row index. So where is this coming from? This is coming as an input parameter into this method. Okay, and then finally we are adding that parameter object to the command object. Similarly, we are doing, adding the maximum rows parameter which this stored procedure has. Okay, so we have added the parameters, open the connection, execute the command, loop through each row, create an employee object, add that object to the employee list, and then finally return the list. So obviously this employee data access layer now has a method which is going to return the correct set of records that the gridview control needs. But then this method will only return 3 records, okay, to the grid view control. Now the grid view control somehow should determine the page numbers here. So how many page numbers should the grid view control show? How does it know that? Unless and until it knows the total number of pages and the page size, it really can't compute the number of page numbers to display within this pager area of the grid view control. So obviously somehow we have to tell the grid view control how many total rows are there in TBL employee table. And obviously to do that we need another method which is going to return just the count of the total number of rows in TBL employee table. I have this method again already implemented, so let me copy this and paste that into this employee data access layer. And if you look at this method, look at the return type, it's an integer because we just need the count of total employees. And using the configuration manager class, we are reading the connection string. We are building the SQL connection object using that connection string. And look at the SQL command, select count of star from TBL employee. And this command will return a scalar value. That's why we are executing scalar. We are invoking execute scalar method. And if you look at the return type, it's an object, so we need to typecast it to be of type integer, and we are returning that back. Okay, so our employee data access layer has got two methods, the required two methods. The first method is going to return the correct set of employee records. The second method will return us the total number of records in TBL employee table. Alright, at this point let's build a solution so that the employee data access layer is compiled. And then let's get to this webform1.aspx. Let's drag and drop a grid view control. Let's auto format this. Let's choose brown sugar as the scheme. Let's drag and drop object data source control onto the web form. Let's configure this. Let's select our business object, which is going to be employee data access layer that's present in demo namespace. Click next. Choose your select method, which is going to be get employees. And notice this method has got two input parameters, start row index and maximum rows. Now when I click next, it's going to ask me to define the parameter values. Okay, at this point I'm not going to define the parameters. I'm just going to click finish, and then let me associate this object data source control with this grid view control. And then let's enable paging, and we get the default page size of 10. Let's set that to 3. Okay, at this point let's flip the web form to the source mode, and then notice the configuration of this object data source control. Okay, so here the type is employee data access layer, and this employee data access layer has got get employees. That's what is going to be our select method, and this get employees method has got two input parameters, right? Start row index and maximum rows, and those are specified as select parameters. Now I'm going to get rid of them from here, the select parameters, and instead of those two select parameters I need to specify what is the first parameter. It's start row index. So start row index parameter name. So what is the name of the parameter that contains the start row index? It's nothing but start row index in this method. So we need to specify that here. And then the next parameter is the maximum rows. Okay, and we need to define that, specify that to the object data source control. So maximum rows parameter name. What is that? That is maximum rows. So let's copy and paste that here. Okay, and then look at this. Within the grid view control we have enabled paging, but we need to enable paging within object data source control as well. So even object data source control has got this attribute enable paging. So let's set that to true. And finally, the object data source control, this is what will serve the data to the grid view control. So what is the method which is going to return the total count to the grid view control? Obviously we have this method get total count. So we need to specify the name of this method to our object data source control. And to do that we have another attribute called select count method. So what's the name of that method? it is get total count. That's it, we are done. So let me run this now and see if our custom paging works as expected. So when the grid view control loads, it has to show 3 records on the first page. But notice this, we have a problem here. It's only displaying 2 records on the page. Now if you remember, on our grid view control we have set the page size to 3. So it should actually display 3 records within the grid view control. Okay, but it's displaying 2 records. Why is that? That's because, look at the stored procedure. If we send start index as 1, and then when I execute this procedure I get the correct set of records. But for some reason, if I pass 0 as the start index and then execute that stored procedure, what's going to happen? It returns 2 records. And that's what is exactly happening, because this object data source control is sending 0 as the start index by default. Okay, so to correct this there are several ways, and the easiest way is basically within the stored procedure. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to increment start index by 1. So set start index is equal to at start index plus 1. Let's alter the stored procedure. Alright, let's reload this page now. Look at that. Now I am page number 1 and it shows me the correct set of records. I go to page number 2, I get records from 4 to 6. I go to page number 3, I get 7 and 8 records. Now when I am on page number 1, though there are 8 records within the database table, it's going to retrieve only these 3 records from 1 to 3. So obviously this is much better than default paging. Alright, on the slide you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.